Emma Harper had worked at the cargo handling station for 3 years, and she knew every corner of the colony outpost on Kepler 442b like the back of her hand. The day started like any other morning, with the artificial sunlights flickering on in the residential sectors and workers beginning their shifts across the sprawling compound. Emma finished her shift at noon and decided to visit the market supply station for her weekly groceries. She needed fresh hydroponic vegetables, water filters, and some synthetic protein packs that the cafeteria had been running low on. The market was busier than usual that day, with colonists moving between different vendors and stalls. People pushed past each other with the kind of gentle impatience that came from living in a crowded space station far from Earth. Emma made her way through the crowd, collecting her items from various stations and placing them carefully in her carry bag. It was near the end of her shopping when she noticed him. An elderly man stood at the payment terminal, looking visibly confused and distressed. He was small and thin, with silver hair and weathered features that suggested a life lived far longer than his appearance should allow. Something about his eyes caught Emma's attention, a quality she could not quite name. They seemed ancient, almost impossibly so, holding depths that made her feel strangely young and small. The man held a stack of groceries in his trembling hands, but his payment device continued to flash red with error messages. His face grew increasingly frustrated and worried, looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to approach and accuse him of causing trouble. Emma found herself moving toward him without fully deciding to do so. "Hello," she said softly. "Are you having trouble with your payment?" The old man turned to face her, and for just a moment, something flickered in his expression, a look of surprise, almost recognition, before he managed a sad smile. "My device is broken," he said, his accent strange and difficult to place. "It has not worked for 2 cycles now. I do not have credits here to fix it." Emma glanced at the items in his basket: fresh vegetables, water, some protein substitutes, and several jars of what looked like medicinal herbs. His list seemed carefully chosen, the purchase of someone stretched thin but still trying to maintain health. Without thinking much about it, Emma reached into her bag and pulled out her payment chip. "I will take care of it," she said simply. The old man's eyes widened, and for a moment, something profound seemed to pass across his face. A look that suggested her kindness meant something far more significant than the situation warranted. "No, I cannot allow this," he protested, but his voice lacked strength. "Please," Emma said. "It is just groceries." The man's hands trembled slightly as he stepped back and allowed Emma to process the payment at the terminal. When the transaction completed, the relief on his face was visible and immediate. Turned to her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable in an indescribable way. "You have shown me kindness today," he said very carefully, "and I need you to understand that this will not be forgotten. Something in your generosity has marked you." Emma Harper. Emma's breath caught in her throat when he spoke her name, though she had never introduced herself. "How did you know my name?" she asked, stepping back slightly. The old man tilted his head, studying her with those impossible ancient eyes. "Your name badge," he said gently, pointing to her cargo handler identification. She glanced down and felt foolish. Of course, he had simply read her badge. She looked back up to respond, but the old man was already moving away, disappearing into the flow of colonists moving through the market. Emma stood there for several minutes, holding her groceries and feeling oddly unsettled. There was something about that encounter that refused to leave her mind as the day progressed and evening came. Emma tried to dismiss the meeting as nothing significant. People everywhere were struggling, and many were far from their homes and families. It was natural to help when possible. She returned to her small quarters and put away her groceries, then settled in to work on some personal data files. But around midnight, something strange happened. The colony's main systems issued a minor alert. Unusual sensor readings had been detected in the lower districts near the industrial waste sector. The readings were faint and unclear, suggesting possible equipment malfunction rather than any genuine threat. Emma almost did not pay attention to the bulletin, but something made her remember the old man. His strange accent, the impossible depth in his eyes, and the way he seemed to know things he should not know. She pulled up the sensor data on her personal console and studied the readings. They were faint and sporadic, but they formed a pattern of sorts, a pattern that seemed to correspond to the old, abandoned warehouse district in the lower levels of the colony. The area had been sealed off for years, considered too unstable for regular habitation or work. Emma stared at the data for hours, her mind turning over questions that had no obvious answers. By dawn, she had made a decision. She needed to know the truth about the strange old man and his impossible knowledge tomorrow night. She would find that warehouse and discover what lay hidden in the darkness below the colony. For now, she tried to sleep, though her dreams were filled with ancient eyes and voices speaking in languages she could almost understand. The next evening, Emma found herself descending into the lower levels of the colony with a small flashlight and her heart pounding in her chest. She had told no one where she was going, a decision that seemed increasingly foolish. The deeper she traveled, the lower levels were darker and colder than the main sectors, with pipes running along the walls and the hum of machinery surrounding her on all sides. The air tasted stale and recycled, carrying the weight of years of processing and filtration. Emma navigated using the sensor data she had committed to memory, moving through corridors that seemed to grow progressively more abandoned. Finally, she reached the warehouse district. The buildings were enormous and hollow, their walls covered in the rust and decay that came from decades of neglect and minimal maintenance. She found the structure that corresponded to the sensor readings and pushed open the heavy metal door inside. The darkness was complete. Emma switched on her flashlight, and the beam cut through the shadows, illuminating rows of empty shelving and abandoned storage containers. She moved deeper into the warehouse, following her instincts more than any clear evidence. Then she heard breathing, heavy and labored, coming from the far corner of the space. Emma's hand went to the emergency beacon on her belt, but she did not activate it. Something told her that whatever she found here was not a threat in any ordinary sense. She moved toward the sound and found him. The old man lay on the floor, his body trembling slightly, but something was terribly wrong. His skin was changing, becoming rougher and taking on a faint scale pattern in places where the light caught it. His eyes, still ancient and profound, had begun to glow with a soft amber light. Emma gasped and started to back away, but the man's voice stopped her. "Please," he said weakly. "Do not flee. I mean you no harm, and I cannot move quickly enough to pursue you." Emma's fear warred with her compassion, and compassion won. She moved closer and knelt beside him. "What are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Calvius, and I am what your people might call a dragon." The transformation continued slowly as he spoke, his form becoming less human and more magnificent. His features became more angular, and faint patterns of deep blue and gold scales began to show through his skin. "I was born thousands of years before your civilization developed on Earth, and I have lived through the rise and fall of empires you have never imagined. I am from the Theta dynasty, a royal house that governs many star systems beyond what your people have discovered. For the past 50 years, I have hidden myself here in your colony, using a form that would not frighten you, but my injuries from my escape have been worsening, and the disguise is beginning to fail. I came to your market yesterday because I was hungry and weak, and hoped that your kind people would not question a struggling old man, but then you paid for my food. Emma Harper, you did this without knowing me, without expecting anything in return. You asked nothing of me, and you made no demands for decades. I have lived among your kind, studying you carefully, trying to understand your nature. Your people are young and still learning, and yet something in you carries a light that I have almost forgotten existed when you paid my bill. You confirmed something I have believed but never dared hope was true. You carry within you the capacity for goodness that transcends reason and Prophet Emma felt tears forming as she listened to the dragon speak. She did not understand all the implications of what he was telling her, but she understood the loneliness in his voice, the profound isolation of someone ancient who had chosen to hide among strangers. Why did you run from your own kind? She asked. Kelvira's eyes dimmed slightly, as if remembering pain that cut deeply. The Theta dynasty is not what it once was, he said slowly. We have become obsessed with power and control. We view lesser species as resources to be exploited rather than beings to be understood. We have conquered many worlds, and on those worlds we have brought only suffering and domination. I could not continue to be part of such actions. Though I was born to the role, when the opportunity came for me to escape, I came to this colony knowing that I would be hunted, but hoping that here, among your young species, I might find a different way to live a life, based on something other than conquest and fear. The dragon's body continued to shift, becoming more obviously non-human, though still somehow beautiful in its strange way. Emma found that she was not afraid. Instead, she felt a deep sense of sadness for this ancient being who had suffered so much. I will help you, she said. I do not know how yet, but I will find a way. Kelvio's amber eyes focused on her with an intensity that made her feel small and significant at the same time. You would help me, even knowing what I am, even knowing that my presence could bring danger to your entire colony. Emma nodded, though she understood that what she was promising might be far more complicated than she could imagine. Because it is right, she said simply, and because you are lonely in that moment. Something shifted between Themabon formed that transcended species and history and all the vast distances between their origins. Over the next several hours, Emma worked to make the dragon comfortable. She brought water from the colony's supply, finding a way to carry enough without raising suspicions, gathered medical supplies from her quarters, items that might help with his injuries. The dragon told her more of his story, speaking in a voice that grew stronger as she cared for him. He told her of the ship hidden in the asteroid field, a vessel capable of faster-than-light travel that had brought him to this system. He told her of the automated beacon that broadcast his location every 50 years, a safety measure he could not disable. Told her of the empire that would eventually track that signal and come searching, and he warned her that when they came, they would demand his return, and they would not accept refusal lightly. 3 weeks passed in careful secrecy as Emma moved through her days with a hidden purpose that consumed her thoughts during her regular shifts at the cargo station. She worked as always, but her mind was always partly focused on her evening visits to the warehouse. She brought supplies carefully, ensuring nothing would be missed or cause suspicion. Food, water, medical supplies from the colony's limited resources, and information about the colony's security systems that might prove useful if danger. Chemical VOs. Conditions slowly improved under her care. The transformation that had begun in those early moments of revelation seemed to have stabilized. Though he could no longer maintain the appearance of a human, his true form emerged fully, a magnificent and terrifying creature of scales and wings and ancient power. He stood nearly 12 feet tall when fully upright, his body covered in deep blue scales with gold patterns running along his spine and across his wings. His eyes remained the most striking feature, still carrying that profound depth of centuries of existence. Emma found that her fear diminished as familiarity grew. She learned to see the intelligence and gentleness in those ancient eyes, to recognize the isolation that had driven him to hide among humans for so long. But on the evening of the 21st day, everything changed. Emma arrived at the warehouse to find Kelvior standing at a window, staring toward the sky with an expression of deep dread. Something is wrong, she said immediately. The beacon, he replied, his voice tight with concern. It should not activate for another 28 years. but I am sensing the activation sequence beginning. Automated systems are initiating without my control. Emma felt her stomach drop. How is that possible? She asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer time. HFY said heavily, I misjudged how much time had passed. The hibernation and isolation of my hiding here affected my perception of years. I was wrong. Emma, the beacon will activate within hours that night. Emma returned to her quarters to find an emergency alert already flooding the colony's communication system. Jump signatures had been detected at the outer edges of the star system, multiple signatures. The alert stated, consistent with a coordinated fleet approach within an hour. The colony's security chief issued a warning that sent chills through the entire population. A large military force was approaching the colony. They had been hailed on standard frequencies with a clear message. The colony would surrender their harbored alien or face destruction. Commander George Patterson, the colony's leader, called an emergency assembly. Emma attended like everyone else, trying to appear calm while her mind raced. Patterson was a careful man, experienced in leadership and pragmatic in his decision-making. Explained to the gathered colonists that an unknown military force was approaching. He told them that they should prepare for the possibility of evacuation. Though evacuation ships would only protect a small percentage of the colony's population, he assured them that he was working through diplomatic channels to establish peaceful contact. But beneath his words, Emma heard the fear. The colony's defenses were minimal, designed to protect against asteroid impacts and equipment failures, not against an organized military force within 12 hours. The first ships of the Imperial fleet entered the system. They were enormous, dwarfing anything the colonists had ever constructed. They took up positions in high orbit, their weapons clearly visible and evidently capable of destroying the colony without significant effort. A transmission came through on all frequencies, the voice of someone accustomed to absolute authority and obedience. I am Admiral Lawrence Cross of the Theta Dynasty Fleet. The voice said, we are here to retrieve an escaped war criminal and political fugitive. You will surrender the dragon known as HFY to us immediately, or your colony will be destroyed. You have 6 hours to comply. The transmission ended, leaving only the weight of ultimatum and fear. Commander Patterson called for his senior advisors to determine their options. The situation was impossible. They had no weapons that could challenge the fleet, no negotiating position that would be taken seriously, and a population that would demand something be done to ensure their survival. Emma knew that she had to speak with Patterson. Though the truth about HFY would be difficult to explain, she requested an urgent meeting and was granted access to his office. She began by telling him everything, knowing that her career was likely over and that she might face serious consequences for harboring an alien. But Patterson listened carefully to the entire story. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and asked her one question. This dragon, this HFY, has he harmed any of the colonists? No. Emma replied, he has hidden himself and done nothing to threaten anyone. Patterson nodded slowly. Then he said, we need to meet this dragon. We need to understand what we are dealing with, because if what you are telling me is true, then we have more than just a military problem. We might have an opportunity. Emma brought Patterson and 2 of his senior officers to the warehouse that night. HFY emerged from the shadows, his true form displayed in full magnificence. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Commander Patterson extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting and introduction. I am Commander George Patterson, he said calmly, and I believe we have much to discuss. The meeting between Commander Patterson and HFY was tense but productive. Patterson was a pragmatist, and he quickly recognized several critical facts. First, HFY was clearly injured and weakened, which the medical scans of the dragon confirmed. Second, HFY had been treated with care and compassion by the colonists, which suggested he posed no threat to the population. Third, the dragon was willing to surrender himself to spare the colony, an offer that Patterson found significant over the next several hours. They developed a strategy. Patterson would contact the Imperial fleet and refuse their initial demand, but he would offer an alternative. He would propose a diplomatic envoy to meet with Admiral Cross aboard the fleet flagship. This envoy would carry a message that might change the Admiral's perspective. Emma wrote the message herself. With Calvior's approval, she described the meeting at the market, her simple act of paying for his groceries, and her subsequent discovery of his true nature. She wrote about his injuries, about the care he had received, and about the choice he had made to hide among humans rather than continue serving a dynasty he no longer believed in. She wrote about humanity, about its youth and its capacity for compassion, about a species that had learned on a harsh world that kindness was never wasted. The message was carefully crafted to appeal to something beyond military protocol, to suggest that there might be more at stake than simply retrieving a fugitive. Commander Patterson reviewed it carefully. "This is good work," he told Emma, "but I need to know if you understand the risk. If this fails, if the Admiral interprets this as a trick or a manipulation, our position becomes even more dire." Emma nodded. "I understand," she said, "but I believe it is worth the attempt." The envoy sent to the fleet was led by Dr. Marcus Owen, the colony's chief scientist and a skilled diplomat. He carried the message and physical evidence of Calvior's condition and treatment for 6 hours. There was silence from the fleet. The colonists lived in a state of suspended anxiety, unsure if they would receive a response or an attack. Then Admiral Lawrence Cross's voice came through the communication system. His response was brief and cold. "We have received your message and examined your evidence. The dragon was indeed injured when we first detected his signature. However, this proves nothing except that you have kept him alive long enough to present him. We require his immediate surrender, or we will destroy your colony and retrieve what remains. We are giving you one final opportunity to comply." The transmission ended. Colony's mood darkened. The Admiral's response had been dismissive, treating the appeal for compassion as nothing more than an attempt at manipulation. Patterson called another emergency meeting with his senior staff. The situation appeared hopeless. The fleet remained in position, their weapons charged and ready, and there seemed to be no way to bridge the gap between what the Admiral demanded and what the colonists could provide. It was at this moment that Emma made her decision. She requested another urgent meeting with Patterson, and she came to him with a proposal that was equal parts desperate and inspired. She asked permission to go to the flagship herself. She would meet face-to-face with Admiral Cross and appeal directly to his sense of honor and morality. Patterson looked at her as if she had suggested something impossibly dangerous. "Would she had you would volunteer to board their ship, potentially as a hostage or prisoner, to appeal to a military officer who has already shown he is unmoved by emotional arguments." Emma nodded firmly. "Yes," she said, "because Admiral Cross is an officer of the Theta dynasty, and officers have codes of honor. I believe that if I can speak to him directly, if I can make him understand what we are, then he might see beyond his military objectives." Patterson wanted to refuse. He wanted to protect this young woman who had shown such courage and compassion, but he also recognized that they had almost no other options. He gave his permission. A shuttle was prepared, and Emma was sent toward the Imperial fleet's flagship with nothing but her words and her conviction. As she approached the massive military vessel, she wondered if she was about to die. The shuttle docked in a bay, and Emma was escorted by armored soldiers through corridors of polished metal and advanced technology that made the colony look primitive by comparison. She was brought to a command center where Admiral Lawrence Cross stood waiting. He was tall and severe, with gray hair and eyes that held the cold logic of someone who had spent his entire life in military service. He studied Emma as if she were some kind of specimen. "You are the human who paid for the dragon's groceries?" he said with a tone that suggested the act was beneath his comprehension. Yes, Emma replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Why would you do such a thing? Because he was struggling and needed help. Emma answered simply, and I had the ability to help. So I did. That is all. Admiral Cross seemed almost disturbed by this answer. Your logic is inefficient, he said. You gain nothing from this action except the satisfaction of an emotional impulse. Emma felt something steady inside her. You are wrong, she said quietly. I gained something very important. I learned that I am the kind of person who helps others when they need it. That matters more to me than efficiency. The Admiral was silent for a long moment, and something almost imperceptible flickered across his face. It was the smallest crack in his certainty. And Emma pressed forward. The dragon chose to hide among us, not because we are weak or easily manipulated, but because he recognized something. In humanity, he saw that we care for those who struggle. He saw that we choose compassion even when it costs us. We are young, and we are small, and we do not have your technology, but we have something that the Theta dynasty seems to have lost. We know how to be kind to a stranger. Admiral Cross turned away from her. You may return to your colony, he said quietly. Your people have 6 more hours to prepare for destruction. The Imperial fleet will not tolerate harboring fugitives. Emma felt despair flood through her. Her gamble had failed, but as she turned to leave, the Admiral spoke once more. Ensure that the dragon understands what is coming. I want him to know that he will face justice for his crimes of abandonment and betrayal. When Emma returned to the colony, the situation had become even more tense and desperate. Commander Patterson had been preparing evacuation protocols, knowing that most of the population could not be saved if the fleet attacked. Colony scientists had begun calculating whether any significant number of people could survive in the shuttle bays if a rapid evacuation became necessary. Emma went directly to the warehouse where Calvior waited. She found him standing at the window again, staring out toward the distant stars where his former home lay. She told him everything about her meeting with Admiral Cross, including the Admiral's final words about justice and consequence. Calvar listened without interruption, his ancient eyes reflecting the dim light. He turned to face Emma when she finished. The Admiral speaks of justice, he said slowly. But what is justice when an empire has caused suffering to countless worlds and species? They call my departure a crime of abandonment and betrayal, yet they see nothing wrong with their conquest and domination. Emma, I must tell you something important. I have been considering my options since you first discovered my presence here. If I surrender myself, the fleet will take me away, and your colony will be safe. That is the logical choice, the one that mathematics and strategy would dictate. But there is another option, one that I have been afraid to consider. Until now, I could remain here. I could formally request asylum with your people and claim sanctuary on this colony. Such a request would create a diplomatic crisis that the Admiral cannot ignore. He would be forced to choose between destroying the colony or accepting my choice. It is a gamble, and it could result in the same destruction that my surrender might prevent. But I have decided that I wish to make this gamble. Emma felt tears in her eyes. Are you certain? She asked. Calvio extended one great-scaled hand and placed it gently on her shoulder. You taught me that certainty is not always necessary. He said that sometimes acting with courage and hope is enough. If I return to the Theta dynasty, I return to a system I know is corrupt and damaging. If I remain here, I remain with a species that showed kindness to a stranger without knowing what he was. I choose to remain that night. Commander Patterson and Admiral Cross were in communication for hours. The Admiral's response to Calvior's request for asylum was immediate and predictable. He declared it unacceptable and gave the colony a final warning. In 3 hours, the fleet would begin firing. The colonists would have time to evacuate to the emergency shelters. But the colony itself and everything on its surface would be destroyed. Then something unexpected happened. The fleet's medical officer, a woman named Captain Sarah Morrison, submitted a formal report on the sensor data they had collected. She revealed that the dragon's body showed scars, consistent with severe torture and trauma. The injuries were recent. She reported, and they suggested, that the individual in question had been subjected to prolonged suffering. Captain Morrison's professional analysis contradicted the Admiral's implied narrative that the dragon was a dangerous criminal who needed to be brought to justice. It suggested instead that someone had been running and hiding from persecution. This report, combined with Emma's testimony about witnessing Calvera's voluntary choice to help the colony, created enough doubt in the minds of the fleet's other senior officers. A formal challenge to Admiral Cross's authority was submitted by the fleet's deputy commander. There was to be a council hearing, required by the military regulations of the Theta Dynasty. The hearing would occur within 4 hours. Admiral Cross would have to present evidence of Calvera's crimes against the dynasty. Emma was asked to testify before the council via communication link. She stood in Commander Patterson's office with Calvera present, speaking to a virtual council of military officers she could not see but could hear. She told them about the market, about the payment device failing, about her simple decision to help a stranger. She spoke about finding the dragon and learning his story. She testified about the kindness she had received in return and about his willingness to protect the colony. She spoke about humanity's nature, about a world so harsh that people learned young that compassion was the only thing that made survival worthwhile. She did not argue or plead. She simply told the truth in clear and simple words. Then Calvera spoke. He did not defend himself against the charges of abandonment and betrayal. Instead, he admitted them. He acknowledged that he had left his post, that he had fled the Theta Dynasty, that he had violated his duties as a member of the royal family, but he explained why. He described the conquest of multiple worlds and the suffering of countless species under the dynasty's rule. He spoke of his own role in that suffering and of his decision that he could no longer participate. He said that the Theta Dynasty had become a force of domination and cruelty, and that he could not return to serve such purposes. He concluded by stating that he had found among humans something that the Theta Dynasty had lost. He had found beings who cared for strangers, who chose kindness even when it was inefficient, who understood that compassion was the highest form of civilization, and he had decided that he would remain with them. The council's deliberation took longer than expected. Hours passed as the officers debated the implications of his request and the testimony they had heard. Then the council issued its decision. Calvera would not be extradited. However, his status would be reviewed in one cycle, after which the dynasty would reassess whether maintaining a peace treaty with the human colony was beneficial. Admiral Cross accepted this decision with visible difficulty. The Imperial fleet began its withdrawal from the system. Crisis had passed in the weeks that followed. Calvera settled into his new life on the colony, became a formal liaison between humanity and the Theta Dynasty, working to establish trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Emma continued her work at the cargo station, though she now spent her evenings in meetings with colonial leadership and with Calvera, helping to navigate the complex relationships that had formed. Commander Patterson officially recognized Emma's contributions to the colony's survival, though the details of exactly what had happened remained classified at the request of the Theta Dynasty. On the evening of the colony's new year, Emma sat with Calvera on one of the observation platforms. They looked out at the stars where the Imperial fleet had vanished. One small act of kindness, Calvera said softly, changed the path of empires. Emma smiled. It was not just my kindness, she said. It was yours when you chose to trust me with your truth. You changed my path as well. They stood together in comfortable silence. Two beings from impossibly different worlds, connected by compassion and the recognition that kindness was never wasted. It rippled outward, touching lives and futures in ways that neither of them could fully predict, but they both understood that something fundamental had shifted. The Theta dynasty would never see lesser species the same way again, and humanity had learned that the universe held not just danger, but also possibility for connection and peace in the distance. The colony's artificial sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and in that light, the future looked a little brighter for both species.